Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good day, wherever you might be joining us from. We are just so thrilled that you are here. We had over 200 people register for this series, and looks like right now we've got about 83 people on the call. So we're just so grateful that you decided to spend your evening with us. As you know, today is part of Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action, which started on the International Day of Peace, which is September 21st, yesterday, and the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action run until October 2nd, Gandhi's birthday. So we welcome you tonight to our first evening of this 6-week series. We are thrilled that you are here. My name is Michelle Sherman. I'm with Pax Christi USA, and along with David Mueller, Elian Lakem, and Camila Perez, we are the planners of this Nonviolence and the Arts series, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative Fall Series for this year of 2025. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen momentarily. Well, actually, maybe I'll say, first of all, we have a wonderful lineup this evening, and you'll see them here on your screen. We'll take time to introduce each of them later this evening, but before we start, let's begin, as we always do, with a moment of centering and prayer. So today, we are also in the middle of the season of creation, which is part of our Christian Catholic tradition of honoring the care of creation that we are called to. And so I thought tonight we would begin with Peace with Creation, a prayer that is the labor and work of folks who have written this prayer for the season of creation 2025. Every year there's a theme, and this year it is Peace with Creation. So I invite you to center yourselves, perhaps take a deep breath after a long day. And enter with me as we pray. Creator of all, we praise you for the gift of life and for the faith that unites us in care for our common home. We confess how estranged we have become from one another, from your creation, and from our truest selves. We acknowledge that our greed and destructive impulses have fractured our relationships with you, with others, and with the earth. Fertile fields have become barren, forests lie desolate, oceans and rivers are polluted. Thriving communities have become places of suffering, and the earth cries out. Beloved Christ, who spoke shalom to frightened hearts, stir us to compassion and action. Inspire us to work for the end of conflict and for the full restoration of broken relationships with you, with the ecumenical community, with the human family, and all of creation. Jesus, our brother, through your wounds, teach us to stand in solidarity with the woundedness of others, of creation, and our world. Through your resurrection, make us people of hope, with the vision of swords turned into plowshares and tears transformed into joy. May we come together as one family to labor for your peace, a shalom where all people may dwell in safety and rest in quiet places. Amen. And so we join with creators, knowing that we are from a creator. It is our birthright to also create and make art and use those gifts of creativity to speak to the injustices of the world and respond nonviolently. So I am going to turn it over to Father Joe Matern, who will lead us through a brief reflection, a framing for this whole series. And he's going to reflect a bit more on the theme and Dorothy Day as well. So, Father Joe, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Greetings and blessings to all those who are staging this event and for all the participants. My name is Joe Matern. They call me Father Joe, and I'm the founder director of this Catholic worker house in Wisconsin, the Green Bay Diocese. We are joined in spirit, of course, with Dorothy Day, but also Pope Francis, who wrote his first encyclical called Laudato Si, which was the very first encyclical in history to deal with the environment. And part of that encompasses this theme of beauty and our responsibility of making the earth a place of beauty and respecting it. Dorothy Day is noted for one of her mantras, which she really got from Dostoevsky, the Russian author, and it is, "The world will be saved by beauty." Dorothy Day's two granddaughters who were visited here in our Catholic worker house, one daughter, Katie, wrote a book, and it's entitled "The World Will Be Saved by Beauty." And so I'm a musician, and we're going to be talking through music also in my upcoming months about the importance of music, showing the beauty that is going to save the world. But the world will not be saved by bombs or by fighting, by armings, but it's going to be saved by beauty. What a provocative statement. Leave it up to Dorothy Day to see in that expression signs of hope. And so that's our theme. And so we're happy to be the host of this series in which we're going to explore the arts from all points of view, and hopefully it's going to really be extensive to our lives, and we will look for the beauty as a source of strength and future and really literally saving the world. So welcome all of you. We give you our blessings, and I'm looking forward to the speakers and what they have to say and benefit from their wisdom on this theme, that the world will be saved by beauty.
Thank you, Joe. And so, as Father Joe was talking about, this is the first night of our 6-week series. For those that just joined us, we'll be going through 6 weeks of the transformative power of the arts and nonviolence. So thank you for joining us as we begin our series. I'm going to start by just also reminding us that you can put questions in the chat for the question and answer session later. So if at any point during the 4 speakers that will be sharing this evening, at any point if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. After each speaker, we'll also have a brief pause moment to receive questions, but then we'll save those questions until the very end for a moderated question and answer session. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Brandon Bauer, who's going to have 15 minutes to share from his experience of art and an integration of nonviolence. Brandon Bauer is an artist, educator, curator, and associate professor of arts at St. Norbert College. His work explores democracy, nuclear abolition, terrorism, and the climate crisis through photography, video, and installation, often using cultural ephemera. His art has been exhibited internationally and is held in collections such as the Museum of Contemporary Photography and the Center for the Study of Political Graphics. As an educator, he develops civics-focused service learning courses that engage students in culturally engaged art and democratic practice. He advocates for creative, experimental civic education as essential to building a just, multicultural democracy. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my slideshow and get this started. So yeah, thank you so much. I mean, first, I want to extend my gratitude to you, Michelle, and to David for inviting me to speak, and to the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, Pax Christi, Casa Esther, and all those who are working to bring this series together. It's a very important topic. I also want to express my appreciation to the other panelists tonight, just for the inspirational work that they do, and I'm really honored to be here speaking with all of you tonight. So I'll start with a brief background about how I began working in a socially engaged manner with my art. I went to art school, I studied art, I studied painting, but especially around 2003 in the run up to the war in Iraq, I started to feel that, painting in my studio wasn't quite enough. And so I was trying to figure out ways in which I could engage, issues I cared about, my concern for this kind of rush to war. And so I began this street flyer campaign, War is Not the Answer. What you see here is based off of a relief print that I did in my studio, but I, photocopied it and, placed it around the street so that it could be seen, kind of out in public rather than just hidden away in my studio or in an addition in a gallery or something like that. And then along with that, I had the good fortune of working on this book called Peace Signs, The Anti-War Movement Illustrated, which was basically looking at this period in which this immense creativity that was going on all around the world, where people were trying to create work, to have a say, to try to stop a war before it began. And it was edited by two editors based in Barcelona, and then another editor and I who were based in Milwaukee at the time. And we gathered work from all over the world. And most anti-war artwork that you see is usually, in history, is a response to some horrible tragedy or after years of conflict. But this was kind of a unique period in that people were really trying to make this work say something, try to stop a war before it began. So I was really fortunate to collaborate on and help to edit this collection. And then along with that, I was invited to create a poster for the Celebrate People's History poster series. And it's at the time, it was just kind of brand new. I think it was only a few years old. There was only a few posters that had been produced in the series, but there was a kind of a long-term vision for it, and it's still going on today, and people are still creating these posters for this series. But being in Milwaukee, and thinking about the peace movement that I was being involved in, I wanted to find a way to connect to other peace movements in the past. And I had been working and living and volunteering at the Catholic Worker Home in Milwaukee, Casa Maria. And in their office, they had a stack of these pamphlets called Delivered into Resistance, which was all about this kind of anti-war Catholic peace movement in the Vietnam era. And one of the things that was highlighted in this was the actions by what became known as the Milwaukee 14. And I saw in their action, this notion that like pacifism isn't passive, that sometimes it really, sometimes when you're trying to get across the message, it takes dramatic action, symbolic action. And, all of that was kind of part of what they created and what they did. And this is just a photo of Michelle and David at the Milwaukee 14 commemoration and prayer witness that just this last March. And I'm just always really happy that my work still serves as a commemoration of this. And then around 2011, I began working at St. Norbert College. And St. Norbert College is a really unique institution. Unlike other, Catholic orders, the Norbertines, don't typically go into education. And in fact, St. Norbert College is the only Norbertine institution of higher learning. But it's informed by these Norbertine ideas, which are really important, and they have these kind of core values that, at their core, kind of is seeking to cultivate community shaped by contemplation and meaningful action, and always grounded in the specific needs of the place where, the Norbertines find themselves living and serving. And so, at the time of the college's founding, that was one of the things that they felt, this area needs a college. And so they created St. Norbert College. But through, a number of different like teaching and learning fellowships and things like that, and different things that I've been involved in, I found this real connection between those core Norbertine values, along with some of these core concepts in service learning, pedagogy, and in concepts of artistic activism, being rooted in trying to create community, having a space for contemplation and reflection, creating meaningful action from that, and being rooted in the local community, through reciprocity and grounded in local culture. So in the fall of 2020, after a number of fellowships, I began putting together a new course that I began creating, and it was called Art in a Democratic Society. And the goal of it was to create, creative, focused course looking at, experiential civics in a way, taking this kind of Deweyan, John Dewey idea of creative democracy and turning it into a course. And, so this is just looking at, kind of the way that the course is organized. Of course, there's a course text and there's, different kind of developmental assignments and things like that. But, some of that experiential work that we do is working on campus get out the vote work, and then the students participate in meaningful civic service in the community, particularly in 2020 with COVID and, older people who were, at most risk of kind of the worst effects of COVID, being poll workers. That we work to try to get students into poll working and things like that, which is a fantastic way for them to experience kind of the mechanisms of democracy firsthand. And so then in fall of 2022, I did another iteration of the course. I curated an exhibition by Chicago-based artist Aram Hansafuentes. At the time, she was teaching at Loyola. She's currently teaching at the School of the Art Institute. But it was an exhibition called Let Us Vote, and it was focusing on disenfranchisement and how to meaningfully participate in the political process. And one of the cores of the exhibition was this project of hers called the Protest Banner Lending Library. And this is this large, kind of sprawling, multifaceted project that she's been working on for a number of years. And my students learned her, protest banner making process using fabric and things like that. They made their own banners that were available for checkout through the exhibitions. And several local businesses actually checked out the banners and hung them up in their windows and things like that. So that was pretty cool. And then we also had a protest banner making workshop for the campus and the community. And it was just a way for people to come together, kind of explore ideas of political identity, explore their values, and be able to have conversations about that while making, and we had get out the vote, voter registration drive along with the banner making. And that semester, I also invited a group called the Center for Artistic Activism, and they work around the world on a range of issues. But in 2020, they began a project called the Unstoppable Voters Project. And I invited them specifically to come and work with my students along with some local organizations to do some get out the vote work in the community. So we worked with the Coalition of Voting Organizations of Brown County, which is, as the name implies, a large kind of umbrella organization of voting organizations, as well as this organization called Joshua, which is a faith-based justice organization based at St. Matthews in Green Bay. And then, of course, our Norman Miller Center for Peace, Justice, and Public Understanding. And we all worked together, learned kind of the techniques of artistic activism and put them to use in some get out the vote work during that time. And the Unstoppable Voters, as they say, you know, the goal of it is to protect the U.S. freedom to vote with creativity and innovation. And so it's really this combination between civic engagement and the creative process. And that's one of the things that's really amazing about what the Center for Artistic Activism does, is they really analyze the creative process and try to put it to use to, you know, civic good. And in 2024, I was asked to co-lead Unstoppable Voters Faculty Fellowship. And we had a range of fellows from a number of different institutions. We had, you know, private, research intensive institutions like Carnegie Mellon. We had faith-based institutions like Augsburg up in the Twin Cities, Xavier University of Louisiana down in New Orleans, and you know, state schools, Arizona State, University of Maine. So a range of different faculty teaching in different fields in a range of institutions. And what we did is we trained them in the Unstoppable Voters creative campaign framework. And this basically guides, you know, the users through the steps of how to build a creative campaign, you know, how to think about, you know, ideas and iteration, you know, how to think about like audience, what do you want, you know, people to get out of this. And there's like this built-in kind of smart kind of evaluation process that's right in it. And it's all captured, and they have a wonderful toolkit called the Unleashing Unstoppable Voters Creative Campaign Toolkit. And it walks through the process. It has, you know, case studies and examples and things like that. So this is one of the main resources that the fellows used. And here's some examples of some of the projects. So this is from D.T. Burns. He's a adjunct professor of playwriting at Point Park University, and he had Reggie. Him and his students created Reggie, the registration pierogi, and it was a hit. You know, so he was just trying to find a way to like creatively engage, have some fun. What's going to draw people in? And so they created this essentially, you know, voter registration mascot that would go to their university kind of voter registration events, was on local news, he was invited into parades and stuff like that. So really, you know, became a mascot. This is another example of some of the work that they did. This is from Daniela Mascarenas, assistant professor of political science down in Xavier. And her students and student organization created these political party games. So instead of just saying, oh, do you know where your poll location is? You know, they had kind of pinned the poll, you know, like, so to make it fun and interactive and educational, and, you know, guess who's on your ballot? You know, so they created these party games in a way to, you know, drive engagement and get people involved in the process. And then Susan Smith up in University of Maine created this project with her student called There's No Us Without You. And they did these silhouette drawings and had this dialogue cafe. So really trying to engage people with, like, you know, what are your values? What are you thinking about? What are your concerns? What's your vision for the future? To try to create this space of dialogue around, you know, the issues in the election, and to have people be able to speak about that with people, you know, they may or may not know. So one of the things that's really emphasized in the creative campaign process is you want to get people beyond, you want to make your projects beyond raising awareness. For the most part, people are aware, they may not know all the specifics, but they may know how they already feel about things. And so it's not that you just want to raise their awareness. You actually want to get them to do something. In the case of nonpartisan voter, work, you're trying to get them out to vote. So, that is one of the things that they emphasize. It's not, this kind of work is not about raising awareness. It's about actually, creating action. So, one of the things that they say is, what do you want them to think? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do, ultimately? And as we know, we're facing a time in which we have people who are, using a well-worn playbook, weaponizing fear, trying to, separate people, rewriting history, trying to destroy facts. They know what they want people to think, feel, and do. But we ultimately, need to overcome this. And how do we do this? We, meet fear with delight, surprise, and wonder, and joy. We cultivate civic imagination. We create community, which, is a way of dispelling isolation and alienation. And, remember, we want to do this with the things that art gives us, the powers of art, gives us purpose and meaning. It gives us surprise. It gives us, it allows us to participate. It creates meaning. And so this is why the arts are so important in this kind of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. We'll take a moment of quiet to process and take in all that Brandon has shared and also the images that he's shared. So you're welcome to put in questions in the chat and we'll hold them for later. But let's just take a moment to appreciate all of the creativity that Brandon has put before us. We have a number of gratitudes being voiced in the chat and a number of clapping emojis too. So thank you again, Brandon. We look forward to our conversation in a bit. Next, I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Becky McIntyre, and I'm going to highlight her on chat here. There we are. So welcome, Becky. Becky is a community artist, muralist, and printmaker living in Philadelphia. She believes in the transformative and healing nature of art, especially art done in the context of community and relationship, and seeks to bring awareness to socio-political issues and activate and inspire new ways of being through her work. She is an extended member of the Catholic Worker Movement and regularly creates art and does related arts programming for different Catholic worker and Catholic worker adjacent communities. She is also the visual artist for the Synodality in Catholic Higher Education in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, the SHEEP Project. She's currently working as a campus minister for Chestnut Hill College, and you can learn more about Becky and her art in the link that I just dropped in the chat. Becky will speak for about 10 minutes about her work, and at any point, if you would like to drop a question in the chat, you're welcome to do that. Welcome, Becky.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And thank you, David and Eliane and Camila and all of you for creating this series and for inviting me to be part. So I'm going to share my screen. So hi everyone. Like Michelle said, my name is Becky and I'm a community artist in Philadelphia, and I create spaces for people to encounter, imagine, and dream together through creative practice. And I've really come to see the importance of facilitating alternative, nonviolent ways for people to encounter each other through the arts. And so much of my practice is community art making. And so doing murals, workshops, talks, protest art, retreats, everything is participatory. Um, and so I'm going to share a little bit about that, about the different ways that I engage in community art making. And so there's a lot of ways that art can be communal and bring us together and allow us to use our bodies as we collectively work to build a better world. And so I'm going to share a little bit about this vocation of mine, and focus particularly on mural making as an embodied and collective way of making art. But first, I wanted to share a little bit about something that has formed me, the Catholic worker movement, as many people have shared about so far. But this anarchist, movement of hospitality and living the gospel values and nonviolence and activism and resistance has definitely informed my art practice. And so I've always done art throughout my life, but I originally it would kind of be my reflective space for myself. But as I found printmaking specifically, and which is a form that is very rooted in resistance and movement spaces because it is so accessible, and it's usually pretty cheap, and you're able to make a bunch of copies of things. And so it's been used historically throughout movements, and so has history in the lineage of the Catholic worker. And so I started learning this and was able to create some lino cuts for the Los Angeles Catholic Worker, where I lived for about a year, the newspaper cover. And so being able to create art and then share it like in this way of being able to make hand prints felt really meaningful, and then realized how much more important and valuable art became to me when it was practiced in the context of community, and instead of just for myself. And so being able to engage with other people through the brainstorming process that combines my values with the larger cause to create art for, which is what I love. And so here's some other examples of my prints. So then a friend, Sarah Fuller, who is also a Catholic worker artist, and I started to do some printmaking workshops together, and allowing and creating space for people to create their own resistance art or create their own pieces of art, and also acknowledging that this particular art form is really cool because it's very hands-on. And so part of the Catholic worker movement is resisting technology and resisting fast paced capitalist items, and so making things yourself. And so crafting and making things, working with your hands and creating your own entertainment and sharing in that together, it's been something really valuable of these printmaking workshops. And then also creating art that is useful and wearable and shareable. And so it's another way that I am able to share my art, is through putting it on clothing and acknowledging that that art in this way shares a message and creates a space and an environment. And so I've partnered with an organization called Philadelphia Printworks here in Philly, and they uplift local artists to and create or share artwork from artists that is inspired by past and present social justice movements, and then part of the proceeds get to be donated to local organizations doing justice work. And so coming to mural making, just acknowledging this collective and community building practice through murals that I've been able to be a part of. And so I don't only love murals because Philly is the mural capital of the world, but also because they're communal and they're embodied and they're public, and they spread light on voices and issues and communicate messages and like uplift the story or the mission of an organization or a place or a neighborhood or a community. They visualize it, and they capture collective communal discernment and listening, and they encourage nonviolent dialogue and encounter with each other. And so here are some examples of projects that I've worked on. And so my mural journey began in high school, but then got involved with this organization called Walls for Justice a few years ago that started during the pandemic, right around the time that George Floyd protests were happening. And the founder, Sam Rodriguez, he created it as an alternative way for people to engage with protest. And so started by painting on boarded up storefronts. And then it became a nonprofit, more mural organization that was very participatory and like allowed for connection between artists to like have the opportunity to upscale their work, connecting with community organizations that can like share their story of their place by having a mural in their space, and then businesses to help fund those projects and those community engagements. And so learning through walls, this process of community brainstorming and community paint days, that has so much informed my practice. And so here's an example of a mural that I did at Cherry Street Pier. And so people were able to come in and write on this like tree that you can see here on the right, and share the question was, what do you want to change about the world? And then we wove literally and figuratively into this design all of those things that people wanted to change about the world into these hands weaving. And here's another one where this was at a library, and so kids and their families got to come and like share answering some questions through writing and through drawing what the space of the library meant to them, what they makes them feel. And so then that got to be synthesized into these like door murals that allowed a local artist to be able to upscale her work into a mural. And so also because a lot of the art that I do through murals is coming from the community. So like I don't come in with a design, right? Like I come in with an empty openness to just receiving and listening, which allows and is exciting for people to actually feel listened to and heard and then see that up on the wall, right? That they like that idea got transferred from them onto the wall and then they got to help paint it, which is empowering and maximizes participation, and so that all stakeholders and community can be involved. And so the way that I get to like also have my values included in this, right, is like that I get choosing what projects I say yes to and like the mission of those organizations. And so here are some recent ones that I did with a counseling center at St. Joe's University with students, and then also with another organization called Pathways to Housing that provides no barrier housing for folks with dual diagnosis. And so they got to help participate in the brainstorming and then the painting of the project. And another way that I engage with art is through spirituality and retreats and workshops. And so also thinking about the arts as a way to encounter the divine, encounter spirituality, and like acknowledge that God can be so much more than sometimes the like theologies and narratives that we have. And so using the arts to help get us outside of that, expand upon our imagination of what God is, what God can be, the being of the source, the creator, and yeah, so using the arts to allow us those different modalities to allow us to engage and imagine differently. And lastly, another way that I use my art is through protest art. And so I got to spend some time at Bread and Puppet, that does political art and political theater and puppetry in Vermont. And so use that process of like creating cardboard puppets and was able to come to an action in Connecticut with a community called Ben and Casa that their UACT organization, which is unhoused folks and also other allies coming together to support for housing, and ask for the mayor or the city council to like involve that into the budget. And so we got to like create these signs that just like show a different bring like life and energy to protest. And I recently attended a training by this organization called Look Loud here in Philly, and talking about visual strategy and just how important the arts are in like creating messaging. And so wrestling with the question of like, is art, part of the work or is it superfluous? But really like understanding that like we need art to have clear messaging and like bring us together and like create encounters where we can like be disarmed and stay in storytelling instead of ideology and doctrine. It helps us to engage with people and see different like perspectives and multiplicity of perspectives, and have more empathy for each other in engagement, and helps us to imagine and expand our imagination to transform culture, like art helps us to transform. And so just allowing us to think bigger than words too as we do this work. So thank you so much.
Well,
Thank you, Becky.
yeah,
Wow, incredible the amount of
Michelle
um,
will
oh.
ask Christy, but
oh, sorry. There's lots of emojis on the screen for you, Becky. Thank you. It's amazing the amount of surfaces which you covered, where you put your art. Walls, print, t-shirts, which just speaks to the many canvases upon which art and resistance can take place. So thank you so much. I look forward to our conversation. We're going to spend another moment of quiet, sitting with all that Becky just shared with us. And if you have a question, I welcome you to type it in the chat for our discussion later. So 2 speakers have shared, and we have 2 more who are with us tonight. Next, I'm going to introduce Robert Shetterly, who is with us. Robert is a visual artist, a social activist, and writer. For the past 20 years, he has painted portraits of citizens who address issues of social, environmental, and economic fairness in the series Americans Who Tell the Truth, now the subject of Kane Lewis's documentary, Truth Tellers. The project is recorded in a multi-volume book series, the first of which is Portraits of Racial Justice, Americans Who Tell the Truth, from New Village Press in 2021, followed by Portraits of Earth Justice, Americans Who Tell the Truth, also by New Village Press in 2022, and Portraits of Peacemakers, Americans Who Tell the Truth, from New Village Press 2024. Shetterly has illustrated for the Maine Times newspaper, the National Audubon's children's newspaper Audubon Adventures, and 30 children's titles. As an independent artist, he has contributed to various collections of drawings and etchings across the US and Europe. Most notably, a collection of drawings titled Speaking Fire at Stones, and a series of 70 etchings based on William Blake's Proverbs of Hell. Welcome, Robert.
first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. And I was just so moved by Brandon's and Becky's work. I knew neither one of them before this, and to be able to see what they do and especially the way they engage whole communities to be involved. I mean, that's very much a part of what I do or try to do. And so to see that the way they do that and the way they are successful at doing that is very moving. I just want to say a little bit about my background. I'm a self-taught artist. I live in a little town on the coast of Maine. I was have always the voice that I sort of found for myself as an artist was surrealist, and I gave all that up in 2002 and during the run up to the Iraq War. I mean, Brandon, I think, had a similar time of convergence or conversion to doing some of the work he does about that time. I mean, I knew, as probably many of you did, that we were being lied to by our government, as is so often the case when they want to start some kind of imperialistic military adventure. And I have been involved in, anti-war work since I was a student during the Vietnam years. And for some reason, I took the run up to Iraq, a little harder than I had some of the others in terms of what I decided was that I could not uh, live in this country without deciding to be a now full-time activist through the thing that I do best, which is painting. And the question was what to do. I mean, I was full of, as I suspect some of the other people were, rage and grief about where we were going, that our major media was cheerleading us into another war, and what to do. I couldn't think for a while. What I knew that I didn't want to do was use my art to simply be an extension of my verbal ranting, which I was driving people crazy with around me. I thought that I needed to find some way to take all that negative energy, the grief and the uh, pain and the anger, and do something positive with it. And so what I came up with was really started as a therapy project. It was not meant to be the kind of political art that it's become. I mean, it's now a national project, and there are now over 280 of these portraits that travel all over the country. They've been in more than 40 states, colleges, museums, libraries, churches, all over the place, as models of courageous citizenship. Um, but what uh, when I decided to do that, the first question was, well, who do you paint? Who are the models of courageous citizenship? Who are the people of resistance? But it's very important that in terms of what we're talking about today, that this is really about opposing war. But when I started to look at um, American history and the violence of American history, you really couldn't exclude any part of it because there'd been dishonesty and violence everywhere. And so the first portraits were all 19th century figures. I started with Walt Whitman and Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Harriet Tubman, Jane Addams, Mother Jones, all these 19th century people. And then just kept delving deeper and deeper into our history. And, once I got past painting the icons, who else? And I've been concentrating more and more on people that not everybody knows about, and maybe often nobody knows about, or very few people, um, trying to make the point with these portraits that this is not about people on pedestals that most of us can't be like, that these are real people, flawed people like all of us, who through acts of persistence and courage make a difference. Either a short-term difference or sometimes a very long-term difference. So let's look at Michelle, if we want to switch on the first portraits, and I'll show you what they look like. I put up a couple of these that are, and you can go to there. So one of the things that is particularly important to me, and probably to all of us, I assume, is that one of the reasons that so much violence is practiced by this country, or is allowed to be practiced by this country, is because we don't teach peace. Schools all over the country don't teach, how to negotiate, how to come to a different conclusion. They don't teach the viability of nonviolent action to create peaceful outcomes. So this is just two of the many teachers I've painted around peace teaching, and one is the one on the right on my screen. Coleman McCarthy is the man who traveled around Washington D.C. for many years on his bicycle, volunteering in high schools all over the city, and teaching young people how to how to think about making peace in the world. And I think his quote is particularly important. He says, "Give peace a chance, yes, but why not get serious and give it a place in the curriculum? Peace courses in every school, every grade, every nation. Unless we teach our children peace, someone else will teach them violence." We have a government and often schools that are proclaim the not only the effectiveness of peace, but the moral rightness of it, and particularly these days, the vengeance of it, and the appropriateness of that vengeance. We need, in every school, um, and Coleman McCarthy is often thought of as the father of peace studies, and his books about how to teach peace are extraordinary. So I went to down and sat in on his classes and spent time with him, and then painted this portrait of him. John Hunter, the man on the other side there, is a fourth grade teacher from Charlottesville, Virginia. Um, I recommend a book he wrote called World Peace and Other Fourth Grade Achievements. And you would think that's kind of tongue in cheek. Not really. What he does in his classes starting 40 years ago was to give fourth graders all of the most serious and complicated and intractable problems there are in the world that nations get befuddled about how to solve, and then result in violence. And what he does is gets these kids, fourth grade kids, gives them each a portfolio of 50 difficult problems, having to do with environment, with climate change, with different income levels, with all sorts of resources, all the things that adults have trouble with. And he gets them to negotiate with each other and solve these problems. He doesn't tell them how to do it. He tells them that the only thing they have to do is have every country come out ahead at the end. And they do it. They always, as he puts it, win. Uh, he gives the same set of problems to adults, and they fail. The same set. And they can't do it. They always want to have a zero sum. Somebody has to win in order for other people, or somebody has to lose, or a lot of people have to lose for other people to win. The kids understand when they start to look at how the common good can be constructed, that it has to be constructed out of a win-win-win for everybody. It's brilliant, and he's a brilliant man. I remember going to visit him in Charlottesville. It's like I'd met the Buddha when I met him. It's just a spectacularly um, deep and wise and interesting man. And I really recommend his books. Well, both the books of both these people, Coleman McCarthy and John Hunter, they're very complementary. To me, that's, um, uh, the world is in the situation it's in today, and it looks that these problems we have are so urgent, and they are urgent. But if we're taking the long view, which we want to be able to take, it has to begin with education and the respect we have for our own children and their ability to make peace. Okay, let's go on to the next one, Michelle. So these two people, probably one of them the one on the right, Ron Kovic, wrote that famous book, Born on the 4th of July. He was a soldier in Vietnam who had not been there long when he was ordered to open fire on a tent at night where they thought they saw the shadows of, Viet Cong or, and the enemy, moving around. And so he and his little platoon opened fire and shot everybody inside, and they heard all the horrible screams. And then they went over there and then found that they were all children. Um, the next day, he was so distraught about what he had done that he just threw down his weapon and walked right forward into enemy fire, and was shot and paralyzed, and paralyzed from the waist down. Um, and has ever since then been an advocate for peace. And he says there is nothing in the lives of human beings more brutal and terrifying than war, and nothing more important than for those of us who have experienced it to share its awful truth. He's still alive. He lives in Los Angeles and is very much involved with something called the My Hero Project, which is involved with trying to teach kids, not to stop war. This other man, Camila Mejia, joined the army in the probably about 2001 or two, trying to get enough money to complete his education, and found himself in Iraq and being ordered to torture people, and also to often shoot civilians. And he came home on leave and went AWOL. And then he thought he wasn't just going to try to disappear. He couldn't do that. He had to confront the army with the truth of what he felt about what they were doing in Vietnam. I mean, sorry, Vietnam, Iraq. And his statement when he was convicted of um, deserting and then sent to prison for a year, is, I think, one of those great courtroom statements that people will, I hope, at some point in the future read. It's one of these things that's not read in our schools, but it's incredibly important. And because of the way he frames, what it is that he had done and why, and then how it made him feel to have stood up for what he thought was the right thing to do. He said, "I was a coward, not for leaving the war, but for having been a part of it in the first place. I failed to fulfill my moral duty as a human being, and instead I chose to fulfill my duty as a soldier. What good is freedom if we are not able to live with our own actions? I am confined to a prison, but I feel today more than ever connected to all humanity. Behind these bars, I sit a free man because I listened to a higher power, the voice of my conscience." These portraits, get into schools everywhere now. I mean, not everywhere, not every school accepts them or asks for them, but in schools, when they are there, we present them to kids and we have them, first analyze the art of it. Look at this person. What do you feel? What that person is like. How would you describe the expression? Why are they looking at you like that? What is that? What is your reaction? And then we, examine the quote. What does this really mean? What does this mean about the things that we are asked to do? What does it mean about the power of a state to tell us that we have to do these things and then have us commit these crimes, and then bear the moral injury burden of having done them? And then what does it mean for people like this to have suffered these things and then turn around and try to uh, be of a bigger service to their community, to the nation? So let's go on to the next one, and I just brought these next two.
Thank you. I think maybe we have time for one more.
Oh, I didn't realize how much time I had. Sorry.
That's all right.
Cindy Sheehan and Jeanette Rankin. Let me just say something about Jeanette Rankin. She was the congresswoman from, was it Montana, um, who was elected, in 1916, and her first vote was against the United States going into World War One. The reason I want to say something about her is, she became an anti-war activist for the next, 40, 50 years. This statement, though, is kind of brutal, but it's so important. It says, "Women remind me of the cows on our ranch in Montana. A cow has a calf, and after a while, a man comes along and takes the calf away. She bawls for a little while, and then goes on and has another calf. If we had 10,000 women willing to go to prison, that would end the war. We've had 10,000 women sit back and let their sons be killed." The point that's so important about this is um, the power that people have if they're willing to be persistent and also organize. They have enormous power, that things can be stopped, often not alone, but in large organizations like that. If we just realize uh, the extent that of the power that we have if we organize. So that's, anyway, there's our website, Americans Who Tell the Truth. You can look at all the portraits, read the bios, and see all the education work we do in schools. Thank you very much, Michelle. Sorry, didn't realize it was going on too long.
Wow, thank you so much, Robert. Wow, one of the things that just strikes me about your work is how all of the portraits are looking directly at the viewer, as if to say, you read what I said, now what are you going to do about it? Very compelling. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's do the same that we did with the first two speakers. Spend a moment of quiet, acknowledging what spoke to you in Robert's sharing. And if you have a question, you're invited to write it into the chat. Thank you. And yes, we will be sharing not only resources, but a whole study guide with links. So I already see that question in the chat. And yes, we will be sharing resources afterwards. Next, I'm going to welcome our fourth and final speaker, Rosie Davila. And we are so pleased to welcome Rosie. Rosie is the Communications and Development Coordinator at the Franciscan Action Network, or FAN, an artist at Pace Bene. She grew up on a flower farm in Kentucky, where her passion for peace and justice took root early. At the age of 11, she learned the story of her great-great-grandfather, Alberto, who was killed for his nonviolent resistance to war and refusal to serve as a soldier. This story profoundly shaped her commitment to nonviolence. Rosie holds a double major in anthropology and psychology from the University of Kentucky. She works for Franciscan Action Network and is a member of the Assisi Community, a Catholic community in Washington, D.C., dedicated to nonviolence and social justice. And Rosie, I see a number of your community members here to support you. So we also welcome Assisi community in a special way tonight. Rosie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It is such an honor to be here. I've admired everyone who's spoken for years. So thank you so much for inviting me. Michelle, would you mind sharing my slides? Oh, thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Rosie Davila and I work for FAN and Pace Bene, and I'm so excited to be here today to talk about two things that I love most in the world. So that's art and nonviolence. Next slide, please. So I've been passionate about nonviolence since I was a kid. It was a bit of a roundabout journey to get here. When I was really young, I didn't know much about it. I didn't learn much, but I discovered it through books and stories. And as I read about Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, Martin Luther King Jr., the Berrigans, I realized that contrary to what I thought when I was, a kid, nonviolence is not passive. It's very active, it's very intentional, and it has the power to create this grand and sweeping change. So at the same time, I was really inspired by artists like Banksy and Karita Kent and Becky. I loved her art for years, and others who really put their art out there into the world, in the public sphere, really loud. And so I loved their art because images really change us. They can seep into our consciousness and they can change how we think. Next slide. So when I was just starting out in activism, it bothered me that when you search nonviolence on Google Images, all that came up were these images of twisted guns and peace signs and doves. These are all great symbols, right? But they're very abstract and we can't really see ourselves in them. At least I can't. I knew how powerful art could be, And one of my majors in college was psychology. And in psychology, I learned that engaging with art lights up the areas in our brain that help us really think deeply. And it can help us imagine ourselves in different scenarios. So it was really sad to me that no one could really see themselves in these abstract nonviolence images. Next slide. So, a couple of years ago, my friend and colleague Rivera Sun asked me, she came to me and she said, "Hey, Rosie, what would it look like if we showed people all the things that nonviolence can be? What does it look like in our homes, in our communities, on the ground, in the public sphere?" Also, by the way, Robert's done an amazing portrait of Rivera. Please go look it up. Next slide, please. So, this question of what does nonviolence look like led to a poster series that I did with Rivera called Nonviolence Means. And so, the goal of this series is to show the range of nonviolence, anything from strikes to marches to mutual aid to, as you see on your screen, divestment from fossil fuels, community safety teams, etc. Next slide. We wanted to show how broad ranging nonviolence is. It's not just one issue, it's intersectional. So we did a lot of surveys and we wanted to see what people wanted to look at in this series. Next slide. We focused on ending gun violence, protecting our watershed. So we wanted everyone who really cares about an issue to see their issue somewhere in this series. We worked very hard on making this project unabstract. And I love modern art. I go to a modern art museum in DC basically every weekend. So I love abstract art, but I wanted to show people how they could be nonviolent and what actions they could take. Next slide, please. So, one of my favorite things about this series has been seeing people interacting with my art, seeing it in homes and at actions, and people creating their own art as a part of the series. I illustrated a book about Daniel Berrigan, and then his family, as you can see on the right, was reading it. That was a very moving moment for me. And I love seeing it get out in the world. That's why I do this art. Next slide, please. I've been really lucky in my life to have a lot of teachers of nonviolence like Maria Stefan, Erica Chenoweth, and Rivera. They've done a lot of work in their lives to show us that nonviolence is active and we don't just have to be these passive players just watching the world go by. Erica and Maria, in their book, Why Civil Resistance Works, showed that nonviolence is often twice as effective as violence and that it's way more likely to bring lasting peace. Next slide, please. So, in this moment, that power, that people power, grassroots, is needed now more than ever. It's really tempting to get tired and turn away and feel small and to think that what we do really doesn't matter. But we need to stay present and engaged and keep building our communities up from the grassroots. So, next slide, I have two questions for you. If you were to, or I guess this is technically three questions. If you were to design a poster for Nonviolence Means, what would it look like? What would you want to talk about? What image would you give to the world? And then how do you personally connect with nonviolence? So this series is all about, art and how arts connect to nonviolence, but there are many ways that we can be engaged with nonviolence. And as we know, nonviolence is only powerful if we practice it like a muscle every single day. So we have to engage with it quite actively. Next slide, please. Art can help us imagine that power, and action makes it real. So I invite you to take all the imagination that you have and let it guide your actions for nonviolence. You may use art, you may use something else, but I'll end with something fun here. I get questions about how to make a poster a lot of the time. People come to me and they're like, I want to make my own. I want you to make your own as well. So one thing that I do is I recommend using a lot of color. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. One of my friends once came to me and she said, oh my gosh, Rosie, your saturation is just so off the charts. I know I love saturated color. No one needs to tell me that. If you don't like that high saturation, you can use a different color palette, but I do recommend using color when possible. I always try and tell an emotional story with my posters and keep the words minimal where possible if your main focus is on the image. Now, if you like a poster that's really graphic designed, like word heavy, you go for that. That's great. I also love QR codes. I'm a Gen Zer, so I get people coming over and they want to scan my QR code. Very helpful. It can link people to more resources that they can use and communities that they can engage with. Most of all, I want you to have fun. I love having parties where we make art together and I make art with my friends. And I think that you like Becky and Brandon were really talking about that sort of like community created art is really fun. So I want to thank you so much for being here today and giving me this chance to speak. And I hope y'all have a great rest of your evening.
Rosie, thank you so much. I just found myself smiling and nodding and saying yes, just viewing the beauty and power of your art. Thank you. Thank you all for your wisdom, for your experience, for your art and resistance that you have shared with us tonight. I'm going to drop into the chat the study guide for week 1. I'd like to invite everyone to join me in one last round of applause and all the emojis of support for our artists here this evening. Thank you so much for your presence and your witness. One last thing I will say, okay, 2 last things, I promise. I will not take longer than another minute. I just noticed one more comment in the chat. Karen Oremus says, as a Catholic, an artist printmaker, and an arts leader, I believe the arts advance the common good. It is an honor to connect and stand with this powerful creative community. Thank you for the invitation. So Karen Oremus, and then also I saw Rosie Fedorchuk and also Lee Miller on the call. So there are many artists in this call. Whether or not you consider yourself an artist, I hope all of us can come away tonight with the invitation to be artisans of peace. So thank you all this evening. Next week, we will, I'll take folks off spotlight. So yay for our artists this evening. Thank you so much. And then I'm going to share my screen one last time because next week we're going to shift from, and it's all creative arts, right? We recognize that all of the arts are so connected. But for the purposes of having a flow, we did separate from visual arts, music, poetry, theater, dance. So next week, we hope you'll join us for music. We have Sydney, Andre, Kirsten, and Anna, who will lead us through another spirit-filled and inspiring evening. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, say thank you and good night, and we will see you next week at the same time. Peace, everyone. Bye-bye.